Okay, so here we are. Two ideas. One's a process, evolution by natural selection. As I mentioned, selection is a poor choice of words. It implies a selector. Maybe even like God is a selector, or humans are selectors. No, there is no selectors. Organisms are born with what they have. If those traits allow them to survive and reproduce better than others, they leave more in the future generation. The populations are then composed of those individuals from parents who were better. What? Huh? What was that? Someone talk. Selection. You're out of here. Okay. Now, the second great idea was descent from a common ancestor. Just like you are all descended from a common ancestors, your parents. And then before them, right? Go way back in time. Perhaps you have you're part of a lineage that's been around for a long time. Who knows? Okay, so you've inherited traits from your parents. As we mentioned earlier, some of you look like your parents and your brothers and sisters, and others look like the milkman. But that's to be expected. Okay, so those are the two ideas that are the most important. The first one we're going to learn about is natural selection, the process. But I want you to remember, things didn't just pop up by accident. Everything that was alive on this planet, and that was alive, was descended from a common ancestor. In fact, we share a common ancestor, we share a common ancestor with some kind of bacteria. In fact, even before there was DNA, there was RNA. It might have been an ancestor that was all RNA. Okay? So, it only looks like Earth evolved life once. It might have happened that there's other forms of life that were around that went extinct that didn't use the same genetic code. It could be that there's forms of life that we don't recognize as forms of life that are still on this planet. But at this point, it only looks like it only happened once. And then, this is the diversity that we see. Okay. About that. Okay. So, these mutations lead to alleles. Remember? New alleles. These are alleles that go extinct. So, an allele that confers a benefit starts with a mutation. It may or may not get into the population. If it does, and it's beneficial, it expands. Old variants, old alleles, they may still be good. They stay around the population, or they may be neutral, or in the new population, they may be less beneficial, and they'll go extinct from natural selection. So, I mentioned last time about wolves and density of the fur, and let's say there's global warming going on now. We would expect that wolves with less thick fur will probably reproduce better than those with really, really thick fur. So in that environment, thinner fur, because it's going to be so warm, is going to be more beneficial for the wolves. If it turns around and it gets cold like another ice age, what was formerly selected against, which was dense fur, is now favored. The population will still have variation. Some individuals will have thinner fur and some will have thicker. There'll be a mean of, let's say, we'll say 10 centimeters in length. And now it's gotten colder, and fur that's, let's say, up to 16 or 17 would be better. those individuals will leave more offspring, the ones with thicker fur, and eventually the population will shift. So there's no one allele or trait that is better in all environments. Yes?
What does that mean in
Allele?
No, the word, like, what is that?
Allele? Sorry. Here, let me rewrite it. Okay, and I'll read it. I'll write it now correctly. Oh, come on. Don't do that. Okay. Okay. So this is what happens. Allele frequencies, the frequency of each different kind of allele fluctuates in the population. Some alleles in certain environments will be favored, others will be disfavored, selected against. So here's our essential concepts again. An allele is a variant of a gene. In this model, we have basically two alleles, A1 and A2. Okay? Now, these are chickens, and a chicken is a diploid individual and has a chromosome from an identical chromosome homologous from one parent and from the other, so it has two homologous chromosomes. The individual can either be one of three genotypes. It can be A1A1, okay, that's blue. So all these blue chickens here, that's A1A1, okay? Now, and that means this is for the whole population of alleles. Forget about individuals, this is the number of alleles that are floating around in the population. Individuals that have this allele, that's A2A2, okay, and that's homozygous A2. And then finally, we have heterozygous. We talked a little bit about this earlier. A heterozygous individual has one of A1 and one of A2. Okay. And so if you think that it's random, let's say it's random mating between these chickens, everybody goes for everybody. So their alleles are all floating around in the population. Some of them will end up like this. Let's say this guy and this guy will get together and we'll end up with green. This guy and this guy will end up and we'll end up with this yellow color. This guy and this guy will end up blue, right? And then we'll end up in the next generation, if there's no selection, basically the same as what we had before. Okay? So alleles mix up. We'll call that a, a gene pool. So the gene pool is all the alleles that each individual will have two alleles. They could be identical, they could be different. That will all go into the gene pool, they'll mix. You'll get up certain individuals that are born, and that'll be the next generation. So, there's different forces of evolution. The first one we're going to deal with, of course, is natural selection. Just want you to know that. Oops. Okay. But there's also mutation, because if you didn't have mutation, you wouldn't have variation. So mutation is the source of all variation. Then there's something we'll get into, genetic drift, non-random mating, which I'm sure you all practice, and then migration. Okay, so these are the forces of evolution that can change allele frequencies in the population. The only one that can lead to what's called an adaptation, some beneficial allele and some beneficial trait, is natural selection. All the other ones are fairly random. Okay, so where did Darwin get the idea of natural selection? You could say maybe he got it when he was traveling around the world in a Beagle as a naturalist when he was like in his 20s. But since he was a high-born individual, he had a lot of time on his hands, and what a lot of high-born individuals did was they did selective breeding with animals and plants. Now, if you look on the left where the corn is, this is the actual ancestor of corn. It's called teosinte. Here are all these, right here, these are all these pigeons. And if you have time on your hands, you would play around and you breed all these different kinds of pigeons. It's called artificial selection. That means there actually is someone selecting. I'm selecting for certain traits. With the corn, I'm selecting for bigger kernels, let's say. For the dogs, depending on what they do, I'm selecting for what they're going to do. Let's say they're little terriers, they're going after rats, I'm going to breed them small. The pigeons do different things. They look different. Some of them are called rollers. They fly around and all of a sudden they go limp and they roll, and then they come back to life before they hit the ground. These are just playthings of the rich, right? Okay. So this is artificial selection, and Darwin essentially made the leap from artificial selection to what we call natural selection. But instead of someone picking a trait, it's the environment that an organism finds itself in, whether it is favored or not. Now remember, the individual does not evolve. Only the population does. So if an individual has all the traits that make it likely it's going to survive and reproduce, and it does, then it will leave more offspring and more genes in the next environment. But there's no one selecting this. It's the environment they find themselves in. So, like I mentioned about the wolves, you can have dense fur, thin fur, whatever. In certain environments, one will be favored over the other. Either it's too warm, and so dense fur, you'll be like running around with an overcoat, or thin fur, you're freezing to death, right? Okay. Okay, as I mentioned, selection, oh come on, it's an unfortunate choice of words because it implies something with a mind that's selecting, and that's not the case. So I'll give you an example. We say that individuals don't evolve, selection acts on individuals, populations then evolve because certain individuals are favored and they pass on their genes compared to other ones. Well, let's say we make believe that instead of people or organisms, we're just going to talk about cells in our body. Now, we know that our cells are controlled. We'll get into it much more later in the semester and how they're controlled, but it's important they're controlled so they don't go crazy and, like, let's say, become cancerous. Well, occasionally a cell will mutate when it's dividing, let's say a liver cell, and this mutation makes it a little bit more likely that it's going to grow out of control. And then later on, that lineage gets another mutation, and finally we have a whole bunch of cells. They start dividing and dividing. They're not being controlled. They become bigger and bigger. In other words, they're better at reproducing than all the other cells around them. Right? Each one cell is an individual. In this case, those that can reproduce flagrantly, how's that for a term? Like easily, when they shouldn't, they will divide more often and leave more cells. Now that doesn't seem very good, right? So the body has a bunch of things to stop it. But let's say over time, it doesn't. You get these big tumors that are made of these cells that are all pretty much identical. Some of them have new mutations along the way when they divide. And eventually, this cancer spreads in the body because these cells have traits that allow them to do that. In other words, they're winning the evolutionary game, and lo and behold, they kill themselves. How? They kill the host. Now that doesn't seem like a very smart thing to do, does it? But selection is not perfect. Sometimes things have traits that appear to make them better in the competition for life, and yet they actually end up causing their own demise. So that's what I mean by there's no one selecting, oh, this snail wants to have thicker shells, and so there's mutation and there's thicker shells. No, it doesn't work like that. There's individuals that, let's say, have certain sickness, and then let's say there is a mutation, and that mutation in the next offspring makes slightly thicker shells. Okay? And that's better because there's spring traps around. It has nothing to do with what an organism or a cell wants. It doesn't want anything. I know you want things. You might want an ice cream right now. You might want a hot babe. You might want a hot guy. Whatever it is you want, you make choices, right? Well, it doesn't matter. Wanting. In evolution, it doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with what is favored and what isn't. Individuals that have certain traits that are favored in certain environments leave more offspring. Okay. Now, natural selection is different than evolution by natural selection. So this is what we talked about. Any consistent difference in survival? So this is evolution by natural selection. In survival or reproduction among genotypically, remember genes, variants, alleles, or phenotype. Phenotype is, we all have a phenotype. We have an anatomic phenotype. We have a physiological phenotype. This is actually what selection works on. And then there's the underlying genotype, which is the genes that are involved in somewhat causing the phenotype. So a phenotype can be behavior. They over there behave in a certain way by being rude. Okay, they can't help it, they just have that phenotype. It's called the rude phenotype over there. Okay? Now, the rest of you aren't doing that, and I love you for it. Okay? But unfortunately, what we should all do is get up and go over and pound those people. But I guess we're not. Okay. Now, so in this little sentence here, so genotype is the genes, phenotype is behavior, anatomy, physiology, development, and then survival and reproduction. So really the most important thing is reproduction. Even if you survive for a shorter period of time, but leave more offspring, you're still a winner. It may not make you feel better, because you'll be dead, let's say, but still, you're a winner. Okay. And different classes of organisms. So in this case, let's say with the wolves, thin or thick fur, something like that. Okay. Oh, who's that? I'll talk to him if you want. Oh, okay. Natural selection is the force that's actually modifying the population. In other words, it's sifting. It sorts traits by seed. Those traits that are favored get through. The ones that don't, they get selected against, and they get run out of the population. Okay? So, natural selection is the only mechanism that consistently favors traits that increase an individual's fitness. Now, below, let's look at these terms. Fitness is an individual's ability to survive and reproduce. The most important word here is reproduce. Even if you don't survive as long, but you leave more offspring, you're going to leave more genetic material into the next generation. But of course, if you don't survive long enough to have to reproduce, then you lost, right? So you have to survive a certain amount of time. And then an adaptation is a trait that increases an individual's ability to survive and reproduce. So, here are all these different adaptations in animals. We've got this snake over here. It's a constrictor. Right? Now, what's its advantage, do you think? Anybody? Look at that snake. What advantage does it have over, let's say, a snake that was green? Camouflage, right. Okay. So, in this environment, now, it turns out, let's say, that climate changes and the background is no longer that color, like leaves, dead leaves on the ground. That snake would not be favored anymore, would it? The same with these different insects that look like leaves. That one is on a green background. It wouldn't do very well on this background, would it? Okay? So, these are all examples of camouflage. Now, in this case, we've got the trait is height. And the individual, if all the animals eat all the stuff that's lower to the ground, there'll be nothing left. So individuals who have a little bit more height can reach higher into the tree, get food, compared to individuals that can't. And let's say there's a famine, where there's few leaves, only the ones left at the top, they're the ones who survive. Okay? Okay. Now, these are all adaptations. Every single one of them. Now, as I mentioned, things can appear to be adaptations on one level, but are actually detrimental or deleterious, we call it, like those cancer cells. Or, for the wolves, long fur or thin fur, depending on the environment, or the periwinkles that we looked at. Periwinkles without crabs, the ones that have thinner shells actually are more likely to leave offspring than the ones with thicker shells, because they don't have to use as much resources as the other ones do, right? So it's all dependent on the environmental context in terms of what phenotype or what trait an individual will have that will make it leave more offspring compared to others. Okay, so we talked about this earlier, I think. If a lion eats you, is that natural selection? Okay, we can agree on that. Now, You're thinking, oh, the lion selected him. No. You might have thought about, oh, that would be a nice tasty meal, but it just so happens that I'm out walking with a friend of mine, and a lion comes along, or let's say a bear comes along, and one of us is going to survive, the one who runs faster, right? But the one who runs faster only has to run faster as fast as the other one. So it doesn't mean like you have to burn down the track. As long as your poor friend who's slow is left behind, he's the one that's going to get eaten. Right? It's simple. If you want to help him a little bit, you can always trip him up. And then he's the one that gets chomped on. Right? Okay. Now that's also selection. In this case, you're being a selective agent by being an asshole. Right? But who's going to tell? Okay. If you get the girl and I don't, is that selection? No? Who said no and who said yes? No's. I heard a no. Okay. Anybody say yes? And most of you, who cares? Right? Okay. This is a form of selection. It's sexual selection. Now, it turns out the guy who gets the girl more often than the guy who doesn't is likely to leave more offspring. So, you think about these bad boys that are out there. I know they're out there. I can see some of them. Oh yeah, they're bad. But some of the ladies like them, and they spread their seed everywhere, and they may not marry the girl, but they leave lots of offspring. Good deal for them. They might get some old poor slob who actually raises, like the milkman. He gets someone else to raise his offspring, right? While he can go and play around. Okay, that's a kind of selection. It's not a selection on survival, it's a selection on reproduction, though it might affect his survival in that he might finally steal the girl from someone who gets pissed and shoots him in the head and he dies. And then he's not having sex anymore. But he might, let's say, have had sex with 120 women by the time he was 22. He dies, he still leaves more offspring in the future. Okay. If I bop you on the head and kill you, is that natural selection? No? No. Yes. Okay. Some people are saying no. Some people, why would it be, let's say no. Why would it be no? Well, not really. Let's say remember this, let's say the one I bop on the head is the one that steals my girlfriend. Right? The one who's a bad boy. Okay. Let's say I get to him before he actually does any damage. Now, it'd be like a lion coming along and eating him, right? He'd still be gone. Now, even if he's gone, it doesn't mean that there'll be evolution, because it could be just, like you said, an accident. But in some cases, this is part of the play of, getting reproduction, finding mates, all that. Those that do it better leave more offspring. It's likely that they're going to leave more genes. And so the alleles in the next generation are going to be predominantly his or mine, whatever. And that's, if it's change in allele, consistent change in alleles for a specific trait, then those individuals have higher fitness. That's all it is. Okay. If a pine cone hits you on the head, is that natural selection? It actually is natural selection, but it's not likely. Well, we'll say it is natural selection. We're going to get to the bottom of this, though, in a second. How about if you get hit by a bus? Is that natural selection? No. Yes. Okay. Good. Well, to see, I haven't said anything yet. Is there a difference between natural selection and evolution by natural selection? Okay. Now, which of the previous up here might result in evolution by natural selection? The lion? Yeah, perhaps, because your friend is slow. You get the girl? Yeah. Might be that guy's going to leave more offspring, or she's going to leave more offspring than someone else. If I bop you on the head and kill you. Now, will that consistently lead to a difference of some people being the boppers and some people being the bopped? It could. There's always bullies that are running around beating up on people. That's consistent. They're going to actually leave more offspring in the next generation, unless perhaps the social environment gets so toxic that everybody goes out and kills those people. Then there's selection against them. So, the bopping, it's the same sort of thing. If a pine cone hits you on the head, well, that's natural selection. Something just killed you. But it's not like you can evolve or you can have a trait that protects you from a pine cone. I mean, some people will have thicker heads and all that, but in the end, it's not the kind of action where pine cones are dropping all the time and those with thicker heads leave more offspring. No, it's a random event. So in this case, there's natural selection. All these things are natural selection, only some of them lead to evolution by natural selection. So the pine cone is a random thing. It would be like an asteroid striking the earth, wiped out the dinosaurs. Nothing, there was no trait variance in the dinosaurs. They all died. Okay? It's not like future generations would be more likely to survive an asteroid. No. Okay? It was a random event. If you get hit by a bus, is that natural selection? Some said no, some said yes. It's yes. Doesn't mean it's going to lead to evolution by natural selection. It only means that, oh, this individual who got hit by the bus isn't going to leave anything except, a lot of tears. Now, is there anything, though, could you actually get evolution by natural selection with an individual some individual who gets hit by a bus, another one who gets hit by a bus, but one lives, but one dies? Let's say there's a difference in thickness of the skin or the bones or something like that. There's a consistent difference of getting hit by buses, and those with thicker bones survive more often. The future generation will end up with individuals with thicker bones. But what's likely to happen here is that some individuals pay more attention to their surroundings. The ones that just kind of wander off smack, they're dead, right? So it selects for, or it favors, individuals who are aware of their surroundings. So if any of you get hit by a bus, I already told you so. Okay? That is natural selection. It can actually lead to evolution by natural selection in that the ones that survive are the ones that pay attention to their surroundings. And if that's a genetic influence underneath it all, then it'll be passed down. So, there's a difference. Natural selection or selection is anything that happens in our life, whether it favors us or disfavors us, okay? Only some things that happen again and again and again are likely to result in evolution by natural selection. Okay? I want you to think about that. Oh, that's right. I forgot one thing. Do you guys think that humans are still evolving? No? Yes? Okay. If you said yes, why? Anybody? Who said yes? Well, no one said yes now. Come on. Yeah.
I think our brains are evolving because of all the technology and stuff that we're like super savvy.
Okay. So, nowadays, you almost don't have to remember anything. You can look it up or go to Google, or you certainly don't have to remember phone numbers. I used to be great at remembering, so perhaps remembering or having a good memory in the past was favored. But there's less selection. There's a relaxation of selection on that now. And perhaps in future generations we'll have a bunch of humans that can't remember vividly, but they all have to do is go to their device. It'll say, oh, go to the market. Get avocados, right? Don't have to remember anything. Okay. Anybody who says they're not changing? Okay. Anybody? I know someone did. Come on.
What about like ethnicity mixing?
What?
Ethnicity mixing? Can I count as evolving?
Well, let's see. Right now it's probably evolving because there's probably relaxed selection on. In the past, if you were in a small group and a foreigner came around, would you be likely to say, oh, come on over here and share my resources? No. So you had groups that would defend each other. We'll say they're ethnic groups, right? Nowadays, there's a lot of interchange, especially in this country in the West, where people are marrying all sorts of different people. And so perhaps ethnicity is kind of being, there's less of it. Instead of groups marrying within groups, there's more gene flow between. Okay? Now, certainly, in the past, let's say the civil rights movement, right? There was strong selection against being black, right? There was. It was terrible, but it was selection. Now, fortunately, remember that there's a lot of cultural evolution that goes on that actually led to those changes so that everyone is treated more equally now, not necessarily perfectly, but better than it was. Okay. It turns out anybody in here was lactose intolerant. Okay. Anybody, and the rest of you are lactose tolerant, you can drink milk and stuff? Okay. Okay. Well, why is that? Well, it turns out, if your ancestors were in a dairying culture, where they had animals that produced milk, and there was a mutation in one of these individuals that allowed that person at adulthood to still drink milk and not get sick, that person might leave more offspring. And that's exactly why nowadays, there are some people who are lactose tolerant, some people, now that all happened in the last 2,000 years. That's actually been proven. Okay? That's an example of modern humans evolving. The population changed. Yes?
I'm not lactose intolerant. My mom became lactose intolerant.
So it could be that, was she always lactose intolerant? No. Yeah, okay, so in this case, probably what happened is physiologically, as she got older, a lot of times things don't work as well when you get older. And so perhaps she was at one point lactose tolerant, but that gene that produces lactase, which is what breaks down milk, is no longer doing its job properly. But there are certainly people like Asian origin or Native American. Most of those people from those areas are lactose intolerant because they didn't have dairying cultures. Okay? Where others did. Okay. God, I meant to get. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna open up. You guys can go, but I'm gonna open up some questions on top hat you can answer, and I'll close it. Let's say this afternoon, okay, or this evening. So you can do it wherever you want. Okay.